drawing being the kind of central loci of the practice. Drawing is kind of, I'm just going to show images because I'm an artist. But I just kind of want to start here. So this is kind of the way that I kind of think about writing as map making, because I kind of think about like my practice as a kind of practice of like a kind of cartographic practice of ideas rather than kind of like linear format of like ideas, or like a kind of like formal organization of ideas. The thing about map making is that the kind of orientations and the movements between different kind of origin points, to me, really excite me, because like the world is like hyper connected. As we kind of think about a kind of internet of things and internet of thinking, which is kind of like very like recent kind of like ideas, or a kind of like cartography of ideas, but like we've always kind of been finding ways to relate conceptually, philosophically, ideologically, existentially, etc., etc. And so kind of like running through all of these, and so thinking about like the way that we like relate conceptually, I kind of wanted to think about that. Then as you can kind of see, like the works kind of become like diagrammatic, and the kind of thoughts of it are very kind of like notational, and it's this kind of same like notational rotation that kind of finds itself in the kind of Katoris documents. So the Katoris documents was essentially a kind of my honors work, which I wanted to think about the township of Thokoza during 1989 and like 93. So I was born in 93, and my parents were like so like I was born in like Alberton, and then like a few days later, then I was kind of brought into this hood where like my parents were like have a house there, and so like basically trying to kind of reconstruct or recalibrate like what my kind of relationship to this space is, and so which is the result of this site. This site is, I think it's a 68. Well, like it's in 4 kind of iterations, 5 at the moment, but like there's like nothing in the first folder yet. But it's to kind of engage sonically, it's to engage the place kind of like photographically, cartographically, so you can kind of put yourself literally in any part of the hood, and you can kind of have like an actual vision of the hood. So in these kinds of relations, and the way that I've kind of been thinking about text, if it can load. Yeah, so like the kind of like map making kind of like things. The hostel actually in Thokoza apparently was meant to be a like an airport, like a mini airport, like a regional airport, and it didn't happen. And so there's like weird kind of iterations and thinkings around like modes of transport, and kind of like thinking about what I used to play with, so like arcades, kind of beating up the kind of Casper, so very like archival documents, police fucking other police, etc., which is kind of a humorous take on like corruption. And so like, yeah, I'm just gonna run through all of the stuff, and then these are kind of like notes that I kind of made in response, reprinted, printed situation. But then again, like the kind of like the kind of ideas about kind of like cartographic thinking are very much at play here, and the kind of texts kind of become images, and images kind of become texts, and these texts or like what, so like I do have like a kind of like a large kind of like, I think about a 12-year sketchbook practice as well, and some of these drawings are taken from like those sketchbooks. And our final archive box. Yeah, and then the archive cutter box, the hyperlink kind of then like links to like ideas about like manhood, and the kind of like Sunday relation to sound, etc., etc. So, yeah, that is just a sneak peek of my live practice.
It's
Thank you.
fantastic. So rich.
Just to add, just for 1 more minute, like what I think is amazing is when Pebo writes and then thinks about the writing and the strike through of writing and the erasure of writing and how it leaves traces, because that then becomes the concept of the writing. So in terms also of writing in academic practice, how do you actually think through the moments of plotting your way, and then, you know, like you discard certain threads of thoughts and return to other threads, and then they are not visible. So I think that's where I like to tap into visual artists' work to make these, you know, like you have, at the end you have a thesis. All the other strands, I think, need to be materialized by way of saying these are thoughts that actually are part of the work, and that are also part of the thinking. And in a way, I must say again, thanks to Nichols to give this writing center as the seedbed of thoughts of thinking, the unthought. Because like for me, this is really what the writing center is about. It's really like you can experiment and you can think through different ways of thinking, and you are not limiting it to the one outcome.
Could you say I'm really excited? This is lovely stuff. I'm sure everybody else's stuff is really lovely. And the point of this festival is partly to create connections and get people to talk to one another. And I'm immediately thinking of people from Mamelodi yesterday. Because I don't know if you were there, but they're finding ways to document the history and heritage of Mamelodi. And there were Diga dancers, and there was this lady elder who, when she spoke, it was as though there were all sorts of ghosts in there. And would you be amenable to perhaps having some discussion with that group? So they're my age and older, and they've got this huge project and duty to document so many things they've been through. They're the receptacles of so many histories. Some are very dark, some are very funny, and then there's this beautiful dancing. And that shouldn't be in an academic paper. It needs to be something like this, where you can capture all those strands and all those different ways of being.
And I just wanted to ask Ken something, why this can't be an academic paper.
It could. It could. And there's something called the Feral Atlas, which I could just give you a link to, which I think is maybe not as good as yours. It's trying to do something similar.
But I think, Pam, is it because an academic paper would not capture the complexity of
I see.
it would be very difficult, because it would impose a framework, a way of thinking, a theoretical way of thinking about something, and it might just actually elide so much of the richness which is there.
I think we can evolve academic writing.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, this is academic, what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's artistic, it's beautiful, and it's also conceptual. So I think we can try and evolve academic writing. And then there's a book of poetry, The Cartographer Maps the Way to Zion. Kind of.
Hi everyone. Hi. My name is Londiwe Mtshali. I'm a visual artist person and a writer. And I'm just going to take you guys through some of the conference presentations that I've done, and also shortly through my practice. So let me take you through a paper that some writing that we published called For the Love of Writing. So we, myself, Philiswa, Fouad, Pebo, and Sajida, who's not here at the moment, we kind of came together and we wanted to explore free writing and writing as a visual practice, as a studio practice. And in our work, we were kind of reflecting on the ways that we relate to the visual work that we make and how we write about it. And so we kind of came together and we reflected on that and had a really very interesting time going through the different ways we relate to our practice, both in a visual way and in text. And we came up with this beautiful piece of writing, which is on the Creative No site. And this is one of the pieces that we came up with. Later, we submitted a paper called Toxic Love Lasts Forever for the Sava conference, which was held at the UT last year around September, towards the end of September. And so I kind of came in as a wants to be invisible coordinator of the year of rewriting, and kind of came in as a person who wanted to just give the space for people to reflect on writing on their own in their kind of different practices, especially for people who were coming from different backgrounds, because it wasn't necessarily people who were in the visual arts or in any type of art. It was a lot of people who were coming from mechanical engineering, kind of heavy, very critical, very theoretical backgrounds in engineering and medicine, stuff like that. So they kind of had this very interesting breakthrough when writing, which goes back to something that I had been thinking about in my practice as well, as both a visual artist and somebody who had a very short career teaching English to Taiwanese students. And so I reflected on that kind of relation to language and to concepts. So what I used to do when I used to teach people English is that a way to kind of break ice and to kind of create like this little bond with my students was to ask them what their favorite color was. So I'd be like, what's your favorite color? And they would tell me like red or pink or blue, whatever color it would be. And then I'd want them to think about what that color represented for them in a sensual way. So my question would be, what's your favorite color and what do you think it tastes like? Right. And it inspired a lot of very interesting answers. And through that, I wanted to think about the idea of the felt world and the way that we relate it back into writing, and kind of these concepts of things that we have in our minds that we never really think about a lot. And so I wrote a piece called Reimagining Home, which is also on the Creative No site, relating it back to music, relating home to music and to materials and to meaning and to sound. And I also worked with an amazing artist called and we worked with her works, which is one of these, which is called Candolo, which is a work reflecting back on her experiences with candlelight and the home space. And so later in my performance, which relates back to my practice as an artist, I wanted to pry or probe into the idea of home for everybody else. So I asked a few questions with people in the audience, which we could do now off the cuff. What does home smell like for you? What's a smell? Like a very specific smell. What's a very specific taste? What's a very specific color? And in this, it's kind of like relating back to free writing, but it's kind of trying to relate to things that are very instinctive or that are encoded in ourselves that we never really write about, but we feel. And yeah, so that's my practice.
Thank you.
I have to ask, what is your favorite color and what does it taste like? I feel like that was the obvious question, so.
Yes, it does. My favorite color, well, it's not necessarily my favorite color, but a color that I'm really more into now is green. And it's like a very specific, like sage green. And what I've found is that, very weirdly, is that I've moved to this flat, and now the whole flat is sage green. And it's kind of just happened on its own. What I think it tastes like kale, which is my favorite veggie.
No, ew!
It's disgusting, but I like it. I don't know why. But yeah, that's what it tastes like. Tastes like, yeah.
I wish I liked kale. My life would be a lot healthier.
I don't know why I like it lately. It's getting very weird. I eat it like every other day.
Wild.
Yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay.
I don't know why I want to ask you. It's not directly related to arts or what you just presented. You mentioned that you taught English to Taiwanese students. I wanted to ask how was that experience and what did you take away from it?
It was wild. It was very interesting. I think it was my first time ever actually trying to teach people stuff. Because I later went from that to teaching pottery, like basic pottery. Teaching English was very weird for me. What it felt like actually was trying to talk to somebody who had the same struggles as you have, right? When it comes to like grasping another language, but understanding that we can't. There's no medium language that we can connect on. So I have to try, right, to get the points across. But it was a lot of like, there was a lot of people. Like, so we used to have like 5 people in the class, and so what would happen is that we would kind of within an hour or an hour and a half, kind of get a small community, and because they all kind of spoke Mandarin, they would kind of like speak to each other and be like, no, this is what she's actually asking you. So it helped. But it was a very interesting experience. Very difficult at times, but it was enlightening. It was very enlightening.
So you were teaching them English in English as opposed to teaching them English in Mandarin.
Yeah. Where I worked, we weren't allowed to ever speak Mandarin or any other language besides English. So you would have to teach via, you'd have to either sound things out, sign things out. As in, I'm listening. I want you to listen to this. Can you speak now? Yeah, no other language was allowed at all. And I guess they were allowed to speak other languages, but I was not. And it was like, you said something that is not in English, and this is a problem. Yeah.
Can you speak Mandarin?
Unfortunately, I only speak 4 languages, and
Only.
we're trying. So yeah, no Mandarin, but it would be interesting. I took a brief Korean class and never quite picked up Hangul, so yeah.
I think I'm also interested in the way that writing and art like fill each other's gaps in, and how do you see that relationship? Do you see it more as a the one having prose that the other one doesn't, or do you think it's more of an overlap, or do you think there's like points of contestation? You know, so how do you see that relationship?
I think there are certain points of contestation. I think it honestly depends on what your entry points to either is, right? As somebody who kind of, I mean, we've all been writing because we were in school and stuff like that, but I think I've had like a heavy kind of background in visual arts slash arts, because I've been like in graphic design and animation and then finally in fine arts. So I think that for me it's more adaptable in like, I'm more adaptable rather in kind of a visual sense. And I think when it comes to my writing in itself, it's actually quite visual. So I think they lean on each other, and it really depends on where you're approaching it. I mean, for some people, writing is always going to be tricky because there's this idea of, is what I'm writing good enough, and is it really fully expressing what I want to say? So
Where art does that more
easily,
Yes,
more intuitively, yeah. So honestly, I think it just depends on where you come in.
Yeah, I'm just asking because every year for the built environment, the first years, we take them to WAM, and then they have to write an essay. I just finished marking them this morning.
Congratulations.
very, very proud of myself. And I find the variety of responses very interesting. Some are very, very surface level, even though when we discussed the artwork in WAM, it was like very detailed analysis, and then others, you know, see things that I never would have seen. So I find it very interesting how different ways with speaking and writing we engage with art. Yeah.
And I think it's also goes back to the idea. I mean, we talked about this in the morning of like sensing things and something being very much more in tune with the body as opposed to the paper. So I think it would be easier for people to speak to something than it is to be like, okay, when I write it down, it's like really final. Do I really want to say this? Do I really want to say that? And there's this element of like your inner critic / editor taking stuff away.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I think I heard you mention that your writing is visual, and I think my question is, with your piece, right, reimagining home, the first thing that I did see there is like a poem in Xhosa, if I'm not mistaken. Now, my question is that a visual artwork that's textual? Is that your entry point? Is that how you introduce what you want to talk about? And lastly, I don't know if you would be willing to share it with us.
Oh, okay. The actual thing is actually a song by Pebofatso. Yeah.
It's nice. In
Yeah.
fact, I was going to ask about it because I just got the first few lines there in Xhosa.
Right.
I pick up that you are Zulu speaking, this is Zulu speaking, so I was just wondering, yes, no, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Would you like to retain your hearing? I can, but do you want those like circumstances to happen to you?
The critic is very, very busy today.
Yes. It's bad. No. Kindly no. The song was actually, it's actually a Pebofatso song, and I think it's a very interesting part of the song, where she says, where Sandra says, "Ayikita kusikai, ekita ikaya." I might have pronounced that wrong. I'm so sorry. So there's nothing that beats home, right? It's a space where you find your family, where you find your ancestors, and it's kind of relating back to the home as an archive, right? Not necessarily, I mean, not like my home, right? Because I grew up in a family where we have like 3 homes, so there's like the actual ancestral home, right? and then there's the home where I grew up in Phoenix, which is like a place where it was shelter. And then there's my grandmother's house, which is like this massive archive. It's not a massive house, but it's a place where my mom, myself, and my nephew grew up.
So it's like the home.
That's the home. But our ancestral home is like, it's the space where our ancestors are. And it's a place where if you don't go there, it's just like, okay, you have to like show yourself. And so I wanted to relate those lyrics back to this idea of there's nothing like spatially or like in terms of your lineage that is bigger than your home archive. Yeah.
I think just on the last part, I'm so interested in the visual writing. Does this mean your artworks are a sort of writing?
Yes.
So that's what you mean by visual writing?
Not necessarily. There is a part of it that is, in quite literally a visual writing. So if I refer back to the conference, to this written conference, where we were kind of using these questions and answering that, those responses kind of became a work in itself. And then there is, okay, let me just show you the work itself. So what I meant by, about visual writing in my art. So there's this work called Islayim that I've been working on. It's an installation, and it's a growing installation. That's the picture I have. And what I meant by visualizing is that the work in itself is quite visual, but it's encoded by different types of writing. So looking at Islayim in itself, and the kind of space that it is, and the kind of things that happen within Sky, a crowd in Zulu, it kind of becomes a visual representation of a history of Ikaya or home for me. So that's what.
My name is Mzwanele. I'm a photographer mainly from Port Elizabeth. And I think, firstly, I'm really interested in the actual art form itself as like a form of writing. I've interacted with a lot of works from people like Santu Mufukeng and Andrew Chaba, who are constantly thinking about the idea of photo essays. So really photographing one thing over a long period of time to get the different aspects of it, as opposed to a parachute situation where you fly in, you take images, and that becomes the final product. There's a communication that happens with the work in itself once you keep returning to it and you keep photographing it. These images that I'm showing you were made between 2018 and 2023, and I think it was like really inspired, firstly by home, where I'm at, and trying to unpack narratives that feel familiar, but also trying to think about the tension of, we speak a lot about how a lot of our history is oral, and I think to a large degree it is, but a lot of it is also visual. And once we start thinking about things like rock cave paintings as forms of writing, we then realize that there's so much more to really unpack, and there's so many other ways in which we have been writing. And the words in and of themselves are just an extension. But also I think I'm struggling with something that was mentioned earlier, the idea of academic writing and how, in a sense, it feels descriptive. It's almost as if I have to explain this. It takes on an anthropological approach, where now I have to almost go into the visual codes, but in a way that allows, I suppose, an outsider to understand it. And for me, I'm thinking about artworks as ways in which they can act as an entry point to different worlds. So as opposed to me explaining the images, finding how the images inspire different things. So I think I've started writing regarding the work in a very different way. So I'd just love to share a piece that's inspired by some of these images.
Sorry, just repeat what you said. Instead of explaining the images. Say it
Don't remember,
again.
but I think the essence of what I was trying to say is I'm not trying to describe the images. I'm trying to extract from the images. So I think there's a sense where academic writing feels very descriptive, and I find that very limiting. So it's like, how can I take from what I produce to produce something else?
You said our artist's entry points.
Love it.
No, it was.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm just going to read a short piece. I once lived in a river where dreams sang songs of old. The dreams had hands and feet, but rarely ever a face that could reside in my memory. The water is our home, they utter. When we are still enough to see the spirits in the mountains, they will lead us to the water. There is a fire inside the river. Around it sits a council of elders who all know me by name. The name I carried before all my previous incarnations. The name that my soul connected to, but my body hesitated to respond to. The curiosity is written in my brows in cursive. Aren't we already in the water? Which is the water that we shall be led to? I ask hastily, as though shoved from behind by my apparent confusion. One of the elders chuckles as he takes a drag from his pipe and slowly says in a calm, raspy voice, "The river is but a passage in our path's tongue, a temporary home. We shall return to the portal of salt waters, Ikomkhulu el-Quma." Before he says another word, Great Mother appears, Mtshali. The council elders bow their heads in reverence, as is custom, waiting to hear if she will speak in words this time. The drum has arrived. We need to get ready, she says. There's tension around the fire. The water around us begins to orbit. The water around us erupts into a hypnotizing song. I rise to my feet, feeling a strong need to stomp them, to dance like I never have before. So I think, yeah, man, this kind of writing is an entry into the kind of work I'm trying to do, where the images, though they are recordings of actual moments, I'm not trying to explain what those moments are, but really relate to the energy that I feel when in those spaces, and kind of the world that I feel I live in when I'm in those spaces. And this is an interesting thing, I feel, because then it like brings back the tension of the orality, where as much as there are visual codes that we have, we are also a people that is very, and when I say we, I mean Xhosa people, we're very deliberate about words. We are deliberate about how we craft words and how we speak. I mean, if you attend a ritual, it could be something as simple as the person hosting the ritual having to give a word of thanks. But the way that would be delivered would be so deliberate, would be so poetic, that it creates this understanding that the poetics are embedded in who we are. So it's this tension of at which points do I allow the images to speak and really understand that certain things are unspeakable, but at which points do I also allow my voice to rise and also articulate what I feel the images might not be able
Ah,
to. Yes. Music element. Come. Why do you say that?
The fire in the
So now, why do you think photographers tend to have a certain level of artistic arrogance? What I've noticed, some of the photographers that you've spoken about, they tend to be sort of like their art form is above other art forms. No, I'm a photographer. I'm not a cameraman. The cameraman is that guy who does wedding photography, who's standing at the corner photographing people. And it's sort of, I don't know.
Hey,
Even when you speak
arrogance.
Yes, because in my instance, my eldest brother I started clicking the shutter when I was about 3 or so, because my eldest brother was I would say a cameraman. He'd go to weddings and photograph people, birthdays.
Yeah.
But if you take those type of guys, they were easily accessible, you can talk to them. But the kind of academic photographers, it's you can ask him a simple question and then it would become a debate.
I guess I can't really speak for the arrogance, but
Like I spoke to Andrew Mlangeni. I said, no, I want to write an article or something about your work. I want to do something. And then he said, no, your language is not photographic. You shouldn't say, I want to do something. You should say, I want to write a paper about your photographic such and such. It became a very lengthy debate.
No, but I think firstly to touch on, so language is a sensitive thing within photography, and I think as people that work with the medium, it's very important that we keep stressing certain things. So, like there's shooting a photo, I'm taking a photograph. So already the languaging around it creates it confirms that photography in and of itself is a very violent art form. And I think part of the sensitivity is in saying, I would love to create an image of you. I don't think that comes from an arrogant place, but it comes from an awareness that I'm not shooting you. I'm not taking the picture, but we are negotiating space. I'm asking for this moment and you are granting me this moment. But also what I've realized is, I think photographers are defensive more than arrogant. And for me, that's born from the fact that, I'm at the Wits School of Arts, and photography is like, it's that thing there in the corner. It's like there's art, then there's photography, And it's when we have had people like Endo Chabango, Santu Mofokeng, who have dedicated like 30, 40 years of their lives to archiving Black life in a very intentional way. They need to be the ones leading how that is spoken about. So there's a labor in reading images that I suppose lacks in the art world in a sense. They don't really know how to read images. So it's this thing where the practitioners have to introduce a language and an understanding of how to engage with the artwork. But I can't speak to looking down on cameramen, because I think so many of us agree that, for instance, family albums are some of the first archives we encountered, the biggest ones, and there are so many stories in there, and it's because of the same cameraman. For many of us to even be interested in the use of a camera was because of seeing a cameraman. But I guess as you grow and you find that you are using photography as a tool to write and not as a service to just render to people, it changes everything. And I think it comes from that place.
Can I add on that? Just like adding on that, we had a conversation, and it came from a question I had about writing as healing. And you were mentioning that you are sitting with your photograph. And I think that's also a side response to your question. That you have the impression, like there's photography, and there's writing and writing. So it's like, how do you write? How do you take photos? How do you paint? How do you whatever? And so like, what were you saying about the sitting? What does it mean, sitting with the photograph?
Yeah, so I think I was trying to hint at the idea that there's an expression that the image holds and that a knowledge that it can offer you the longer you spend with it. And that's not born from it living independently, but I think as you also create work, you start to see the kind of themes that you are drawn to. And the images start speaking to one another in very particular ways. But I think what we were talking about was also like looking at people like Sabelo Mlangeni. Because I think with Sabelo, there's this whole idea where I find like he really focalizes waiting as a critical way to create his work. And it's particularly a body of work called Invisible Women, where he was photographing women that clean Johannesburg streets at night. But like I found that so interesting because there's firstly the waiting that he had to action in terms of waiting for them to start their shift, but also how he photographed it. He implemented a technique called slow shutter, where the image actually records movement in and of itself. But that also takes time, and it's all on film. So there's also the going back home and you're not seeing the images, you're waiting to get the stuff processed. And I was saying all of this waiting kind of informs a particular approach, and it then becomes about that. It doesn't become about the pictures, it doesn't become about the output, but it becomes about the ability to wait and the negotiation that you're having with yourself at each stage of waiting. So like those are like some of the interesting things I find when interacting with like predecessors' works, is that there's things that they are grappling with that aren't in the image. You know, the image in and of itself is the artwork, but there's a lot that happens around that informs that actual final take.
For me, that speaks then to the moment of writing where you actually, as we in the writing center keep pointing out, it's crafting. It's redrafting, rewriting, redrafting, rewriting. It's never finished. The text is always open, and then like how do you sit with the text? You actually have the patience of confronting your text again. I think these are these moments where I think, you know, across the arts, you know, like this is like the craft you are forming in working with the medium. You are speaking about the medium across the different presentations now. And so yeah, thank you for that. I think that's really the inspiring bit what I get also from this work with visual artists to learn to think outside of, you know, this is an image, this is an artwork, this is a piece of writing. Also like the textual medial interactions that you suddenly, that emerge.
Although, of course, in some instances, like in journalism, a journalist would say, okay, bring me a photograph, I'm going to do such and such a story. The photograph would go and then create an image out of.
But that's the craft. If you manage to get that photo in that moment of that person and it speaks over many, many years, like you go into the South African photography and you see Peter Mzwanele, you see Ruth Macau, you see all of them, they do. That's what they focus on. They sit also with it.
I just also wanted to ask, so with Londiwe, we spoke a lot about color, right? And yours is in black and white. So I just wanted to like ask about the choice of black and white photography and how why that's important for you.
I think I was always born to working in black and white, but initially I didn't understand why. And I think when I started making work in color, I understood. I'll say color is distracting, and not in a bad sense, but I feel it really spreads the eye. You know, blues, pinks, everything going on in a frame. Whereas I feel black and white really becomes about form. So you really start looking at what is in the image more than what it looks like. And you know, colors make us feel particular things. So I guess there's also a neutrality of coming to the image and seeing it in black and white, and you being the one that colors it, depending if you can, you know, and what your context is. But I think primarily it was just that thing of, I really think I'm speaking to the form of things than like the brilliance of things, and maybe the color can be in the work that I write, but photographically I think the black and white does something.
Yeah, it was interesting. Before the current exhibition, there was, I can't remember her name, but she did photos of people in front of graffitied walls in Johannesburg. Yeah, and then she linked her colorful photos to black and white photography she did during apartheid, and how post-apartheid she used color again. So it's just like very interesting for me that link, you know, and we, black and white seems somber, you know, in a way that color doesn't, and I don't know, like it makes it more serious in a sense, like which I didn't think about before I saw that exhibition. So I was just like, is that part of what you're trying to do, or is like, I don't, obviously there's different interpretation, different ways of seeing it.
It's interesting because like as you're saying this, I'm thinking of text, and we're talking about text as an art form. But like, why don't we think about that when we write? Why don't we think black and white is somber?
Yeah.
It's serious.
Yeah, that's
you
why I
know,
write in color.
for sure. And I think
No, but like really, I mean it. I write in colors
Yeah.
because I find it too. I don't like it writing in black and white.
and I think
I know it sounds stupid, but
and I think for me, I get what color can do, but it's also that thing of, I don't think the absence of color should automatically mean sadness, you know? Because, I mean, you talk about black and white photography during apartheid. We have Ruth Mutau that you just mentioned, Andrew Chabangu. These people made a conscious decision during apartheid to stop photographing black misery. So the only pictures that you could see are the Hector Peterson pictures of black people being shot, black people dying. And then there was a very deliberate change in the photographic trajectory from a few black photographers who started doing really meaningful and happy stories, but in black and white, where the emotion that they were trying to convey was still present, and it didn't depend on whether the image was printed onto a black and white film strip or a color film strip. So I do think that the content in and of itself still does something, but for me, there's distraction with color, man. There's just a sense of busyness, and not all my work is black and white. There's points where I want color. There's work of mine currently showing at Art House Windows. It's entirely in color, and there it has a place. I'm doing something with it, but I don't think in this narrative color truly has a place. And I think if it does, it would mainly be in how I write and how I express what I'm thinking about when I look at this.
Also,
very interesting.
That lady, she's not black and white, she's all sorts of gradations.
I just wanted to respond to a comment made earlier about how the writing of an artwork can be surface level and not do justice to the artwork. And I think that often speaks to the nature of the task. And I think that very often the kinds of writing that are required, that's required, is reduces in a way and doesn't enable people to engage fully and critically with the artwork. So I think that it's, you know, I think that we almost have to shift the way we design tasks around the art, well, you know, because it's not eliciting or reflecting the richness of the work.
Also, I feel like we're living in a space at the moment where this is a very precious place. This is a very precious engagement. It is not valued for the people in Solomon Mahlangu House, the 10th floor. They just want us to get outcomes. We want publications, and everything has to happen yesterday. You know, so there's like really we have to actually remember the value of this because it is not being supported by the authorities. I agree.
On that note, we are over time. Just like okay, very, very last question.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask, I don't know if I might have missed this, but so I think my question is 2 in 1 or something like that. To say, what do you think is the role or the importance of waiting in order to create an image? And if that is something you implement in your own process of making work?
Sure. Yeah, I think to answer you, it's been a battle between working digitally and working on film. So I think there's this thing where when I photograph digitally, you don't really think about the picture. You rely on the fact that I'll be able to see it, and if I don't like it, I'll delete it. And then you're not waiting for the moment. You're chasing the moment because you have endless shutters. And I feel like when I started working with film, it just came innately. I have this roll, all I have is 10 pictures, this thing is 280, paying 28 rand, that's minus processing, minus scanning. So I'm already financially, I'm not wasting these frames. But also it's just like then in making the image, how do I make sure that I have it? How am I thinking about my settings? Where's the light coming from? How do I want it to sit on your face? And I think that is informed through the way that so right now it's really based on me working with photography in film. That has really slowed me down dramatically, and it creates this relationship where there's a much more thoughtful engagement with image making as opposed to this data capturing style of
Like the importance of that. What is the importance of that?
So the importance of that is that I think photography is about moments, and for me, I genuinely want to have a moment. I don't want it to be a flow. So I don't want to take 10 frames per second and hope that one is, because that is not what photography is about. There's an intentionality that lacks. And for me, I want to know that I have that frame because I intended it. Like I made the decision to frame this. And even if it might get ruined in processing or the colors might change because the film is expired, there's a certain level of, this is what I'd love to create. I'm composing it and I want it in the center, I want it. And I think that's the importance, where it's not work based on hope, but there's a sense of photography is a technical skill, and I would love to be technically proficient at it and know that I intend to do this, and that's what I get. I'm not surprised. Ish, I thought there wasn't so much there. Sure.
Right, thanks everyone. Thank you for staying a bit longer than on the program. I don't want to cut into the time of our the next panel. Just like as a side note, Mzwanele's work is currently shown at the art house. That is when you walk on the side of from School of Art.